A new wind swept across Egypt's throne rooms, cold, calculating, and marked by fear. Exodus 1:8 opens the story with quiet but catastrophic words. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. In a single verse, the long memory of gratitude that once linked Egypt and the descendants of Jacob vanished. Joseph, the Hebrew who had preserved Egypt from famine, was forgotten, and with his memory went the favor that had sheltered his people. The Hebrews had grown numerous in the land of Goshen, fulfilling the ancient promise God made to Abraham that his descendants would be as countless as the stars. Genesis 15:5. What had begun as 70 souls entering Egypt under Jacob's leadership had become a thriving nation. Exodus 1:7 records this growth with almost rhythmic emphasis. The Israelites were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. The repetition underscores divine momentum. God's blessing was in motion, even under foreign soil, but divine blessing often awakens human insecurity. The new Pharaoh, whose name Scripture does not record, saw the growing Hebrew population not as a testimony of divine faithfulness, but as a political threat. Egypt's stability rested on control of land, of labor, of loyalty. The Pharaoh's fear was pragmatic, even logical from a worldly perspective. Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Exodus 1:9-10, ESV. This shrewdness marked the birth of systemic oppression. Forced labor camps were established. The Israelites were conscripted into building projects for Pharaoh's glory. Cities like Pithom and Ramses, fortified storehouses in the eastern Nile Delta. Archaeological and historical studies support that such cities were built with mud brick construction, a form of labor-intensive work that broke men's bodies and drained their spirits. Egypt's empire was expanding on the backs of an enslaved people, and Pharaoh hoped that backbreaking toil would suffocate their fruitfulness. Yet the irony of divine providence unfolds in verse 12. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. What Pharaoh intended to suppress became a platform for God's power. Fear drove Pharaoh to escalate oppression. Divine purpose turned that fear into fuel for growth. The Israelites' endurance was not mere resilience. It was covenant faithfulness under pressure. God had not spoken to them yet in this chapter, but his promise was quietly at work, multiplying where Pharaoh tried to minimize. Scholars across traditions, Jewish, Christian, and historical, observe that this moment reveals a universal pattern. When earthly systems attempt to suppress divine destiny, they often end up accelerating it. The Pharaoh's insecurity mirrored the insecurity of all rulers who mistake power for permanence. His fear of losing control became the very reason control slipped from his hands. Spiritually, Egypt in this text becomes more than geography. It becomes a symbol of bondage, human arrogance, and misplaced fear. The Israelites' chains were real, but the deeper captivity lay in Pharaoh's heart. A bondage to fear of the unknown, fear of loss, fear of a God he did not know. That fear would drive every cruel decision to follow, from forced labor to infanticide. This setup stage is not merely historical, it is theological. It reveals the collision between divine promise and human pride, between fear that enslaves and faith that endures. Beneath the sand and stone of Egypt's empire, God was already setting the stage for deliverance. Before Moses would ever cry, "Let my people go," two women, Shiphrah and Puah, would stand in the quiet corridors of conscience, proving that even under tyranny, faith still breathes. And so the story begins, not with thunder or miracles, but with fear and faith meeting in the womb of oppression. One was the fear of a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. The other was the fear of God that, the oppression that began with labor, now deepened into something far darker. What Pharaoh could not achieve through toil, he sought to accomplish through terror. When the Israelites' strength refused to break, he turned from brick and mortar to blood and birth. Exodus 1:15-16 records the chilling escalation. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. This moment stands as one of the earliest recorded state-sanctioned attempts at genocide in Scripture. Pharaoh, blinded by fear and pride, crafted a plan both cunning and cowardly. He would enlist women who brought life to become instruments of death. The cruelty was cloaked in cunning. Instead of open slaughter, he sought a hidden extermination, one disguised as childbirth. The killing would occur silently before the cries of new life could even fill the air. The Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, emerge here as quiet yet monumental figures. Scripture gives little biographical detail, yet their names endure where Pharaoh's does not. In the ancient Near Eastern world, midwives were trusted figures in the community, custodians of new beginnings, witnesses of both pain and miracle. Their task was deeply spiritual. In Hebrew culture, childbirth was seen not merely as a biological process, but as participation in God's creative order. Genesis 1:28. Pharaoh's command therefore violated not only moral law, but sacred partnership. He was demanding that these women sever their allegiance to the author of life. Culturally, Egypt's Pharaoh was considered divine, the son of the sun god Ra, whose word carried the weight of eternal authority. To defy him was to defy a god. Yet the text reveals a reversal of divine order. The self-proclaimed God King now issues commands against the true Creator's will. The command to kill every Hebrew male was not random, it was strategic. Males represented the potential for leadership, rebellion, and lineage. By destroying them, Pharaoh sought to erase the Hebrew future at its root, leaving a generation of women who could be assimilated through intermarriage and servitude. In this way, his decree aimed not only to destroy life, but to dissolve identity. Historically, this fits the logic of total control seen in other ancient regimes. When oppression fails to suppress a people's growth, rulers often target their reproduction. Egyptian inscriptions and monuments from similar periods reveal a deep anxiety about maintaining ethnic purity and political control, lending credibility to the biblical account's realism. Pharaoh's order was the product of fear masquerading as wisdom, a desperate policy from a ruler who saw divine promise as political danger. The midwives' dilemma was immediate and perilous. Their hands, meant to cradle life, were now expected to end it. In their world, disobedience to Pharaoh could mean imprisonment, torture, or death. Yet Exodus 1:17 will later reveal the seed of their decision. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them. Before their act of defiance comes the tension of choice. Their conflict was internal before it was external, the collision between the fear of man and the fear of God. Theologically, this moment marks the first recorded confrontation between divine moral law and human tyranny in the book of Exodus. The midwives stood at the intersection of two sovereignties: Pharaoh's authority, enforced by armies and decrees, and God's authority, written on the conscience. Their resistance was not political rebellion, it was moral reverence. As later echoed in Acts 5:29, they would embody the principle, we must obey God rather than men. Some scholars, particularly within Jewish rabbinic tradition, view Pharaoh's decree as a test that exposed the spiritual decay of Egypt's leadership. His plan, they argue, represents the ultimate perversion of power, using the fear of life to maintain control. Christian commentators have likewise noted that this episode prefigures later biblical themes: Herod's massacre of the innocents, Matthew 2:16, and even the crucifixion itself, where rulers again tried to silence divine purpose through violence. The visible consequence of Pharaoh's decree was despair. Homes torn by loss, mothers trembling in secret, communities forced to hide what should have been celebrated. Yet beneath that darkness, a different force was stirring, a faith that refused to cooperate with evil. The decree of death, meant to erase hope, became the stage upon which obedience to God would shine brightest. Thus, the conflict was never merely between Pharaoh and a people, it was between fear and faith, death and life, pride and promise. Pharaoh sought to write the end of a nation. God, through two women's courage, was preparing the beginning of deliverance. The tension between command and conscience reached its breaking point in the humble, unseen spaces of Egyptian life, where two Hebrew women stood before the weight of empire and quietly chose eternity over fear. Exodus 1:17 states simply, "But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live." In that sentence, the course of redemptive history pivots. Without swords, titles, or armies, Shiphrah and Puah dismantled Pharaoh's most sinister design through the invisible strength of holy reverence. The phrase "feared God," Yireh et ha-Elohim, in Hebrew carries a profound moral and spiritual dimension. It does not denote terror but awe, an acknowledgement of God's supremacy, righteousness, and authority over human decrees. Their fear of God was not emotional panic, it was moral vision. To fear God meant to see him as the ultimate judge of life and death, the one before whom all rulers bow. In choosing to honor that fear, the midwives redefined courage, not as the absence of fear, but as allegiance to a higher one. In the world of Pharaoh, obedience was survival. His word was law, enforced by soldiers and sanctioned by centuries of divine kingship ideology. Yet these women, members of an enslaved and despised people, acted as though another king reigned above him. Their defiance was deliberate, not impulsive. The text offers no spectacle, only resolve. They did not do as the king commanded. That quiet negation reverberated like thunder in the spiritual realm. Their choice carried immediate risk. Egyptian rulers were notorious for swift and brutal punishment. Inscriptions and papyri from the New Kingdom period record harsh consequences for insubordination, especially for those under servitude. Yet the narrative shows no hesitation, no recorded plea, no compromise. They feared God more than Pharaoh, and so they acted in accordance with that reverence, protecting life where death had been decreed. When Pharaoh discovered that his command had been defied, he summoned the midwives for questioning. Exodus 1:18-19 recounts, "So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, 'Why have you done this, and let the male children live?' The midwives said to Pharaoh, 'Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them.'" Their response has been the subject of much debate among scholars. Some, such as Jewish commentator Rashi, interpret their words as a shrewd and partially truthful explanation, emphasizing divine protection that allowed Hebrew births to occur before intervention. Others, including early church fathers like Origen, view it as an example of righteous deception, where preserving life justified concealing the truth from an unjust authority. Regardless of interpretation, the outcome is clear. The midwives' words confounded Pharaoh. Their reverence for God had given them wisdom beyond fear. Proverbs 9:10 later echoes the same truth. "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In that wisdom they preserved life and undermined tyranny." Their moral clarity exposed Pharaoh's impotence. Though he ruled the mightiest empire of his day, he could not command the hearts of those who feared God. Spiritually, this moment unveils one of Scripture's most enduring lessons. Divine sovereignty often operates through quiet resistance. God's redemptive plan for Israel did not begin with Moses' miracles, but with women's faithfulness in secret. In a world obsessed with power, God worked through compassion. In a system built on fear, he moved through reverence. The visible consequence of their choice was life itself. Crying infants, hidden in reeds and baskets, symbols of a promise Pharaoh could not kill. Their defiance not only saved lives, but safeguarded destiny. From one of those spared children would come Moses, the deliverer who would later stand before Pharaoh and proclaim the very words their courage had foreshadowed. "Let my people go." Historically and theologically, this turning point reveals the paradox of divine power. It manifests most fully in moral weakness and faithful obedience. The midwives' act stands alongside later biblical moments of defiant faith. Rahab hiding the spies in Jericho, Joshua 2, Daniel refusing to bow in Babylon, Daniel 3 and 6, and the apostles declaring Christ before hostile councils. In each, the fear of God eclipsed the fear of rulers, and history bent toward liberation. What began as Pharaoh's command to destroy a generation became the occasion for God to reveal that his covenant people could not be extinguished by decree. The wombs Pharaoh tried to control became sanctuaries of promise, and the names of two women, scarcely mentioned elsewhere, were written into Scripture, not as victims, but as victors of faith. Their quiet defiance reminds every generation that true authority belongs not to those who demand obedience through fear, but to those who honor God through conscience. In the end, the midwives' story teaches that when the fear of God fills the heart, the fear of man loses its grip. They stood before power and chose reverence over rule, life over death, and truth over tyranny. Their courage became the hinge upon which history turned, from oppression to deliverance, from Pharaoh's shadow to God's light. The crisis that began in Pharaoh's courts concludes not with a royal decree, but with divine remembrance. The narrative of Exodus 1 reaches its quiet climax in verses 20 to 21. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. What began as oppression intended to choke the future of Israel ends with multiplication and blessing. Pharaoh's empire had sought to control the wombs of Hebrew women. Instead, the God of life turned that very place of vulnerability into a fountain of promise. In the biblical rhythm of justice, every act of defiance grounded in righteousness becomes an opportunity for divine vindication. The text emphasizes that God dealt well with the midwives, a phrase that conveys more than mere protection. It denotes favor, prosperity, and divine recognition. In Hebrew culture, to be dealt well with by God was to receive the tangible evidence of his covenant goodness, peace, stability, and flourishing. For Shiphrah and Puah, this divine commendation was deeply personal. They had risked their lives to preserve others. Now God rewarded them not with wealth or status, but with legacy. He gave them families. In the ancient Near East, especially among women, to have a household was a mark of honor, security, and divine favor. For midwives whose calling centered on bringing others' children into the world, this blessing carried profound symbolism. God made them partakers, not just witnesses, in the miracle of life they had chosen to protect. The text also ties their personal blessing to the broader destiny of their people. The people multiplied and grew very strong. Their obedience became the seed of national preservation. In resisting Pharaoh's command, they had preserved the very generation through which deliverance would later come. Moses, the child who would confront Pharaoh face to face, was born into the safety created by their faith. In this way, the story forms a divine paradox. Pharaoh's decree intended to diminish Israel, but the fear of God in two women ensured its expansion. Historically, the closing verses of Exodus 1 reveal an ancient principle that reverberates through the rest of Scripture. God honors those who honor life. From Noah's covenant after the flood, Genesis 9:6, to Jesus' teaching that whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones will not lose their reward, Matthew 10:42. The divine standard remains consistent. Life is sacred because it bears God's image, and those who protect it align themselves with his character. Shiphrah and Puah stand in that lineage of quiet righteousness, women who feared God more than kings and found that his favor outweighed any earthly threat. Scholars across traditions recognize this as one of the earliest biblical affirmations of what theologians later called the sanctity of life. Jewish midrashic commentaries describe the midwives' courage as hesed, covenant faithfulness expressed through compassion. Christian interpreters, from Augustine to modern ethicists, see in them a reflection of the Church's calling to protect life against systems of death. In both readings, their act becomes more than historical resistance. It is moral testimony, proof that divine justice often begins in the hands of the humble. Culturally, the reward families of their own also carry social restoration. Midwives in the ancient world were often unmarried or childless, dedicating their lives to serving others' households. God's response to their obedience, therefore, reversed societal limitations. They who made room for life were given lives to nurture. This mirrors a recurring biblical motif. Those who relinquish something for God's sake often receive back more than they surrendered. Cf. Job 42:10, Mark 10:29-30. Yet even as God honored the midwives, Pharaoh's heart grew harder. The chapter ends with another decree, no longer hidden but public. Every son that is born you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Exodus 1:22. Evil, when defied, often escalates before it collapses. The river that Pharaoh sought to use for death would soon become the setting for deliverance, carrying a basket with a child destined to challenge him. The stage was being set for God's next act, the rise of Moses, the deliverer born through the courage of those who feared God. The moral gravity of this resolution cannot be overstated. The midwives' obedience created a bridge between God's promise to Abraham and his deliverance through Moses. They represent the faith that sustains the covenant between revelation and redemption. In them, we see that divine intervention often begins through human conscience, a heart aligned with heaven's values even in the face of earthly danger. And so the story closes where it began, with life flourishing in the midst of oppression. The same God who remembered Noah in the flood, Sarah in her barrenness, and Joseph in his prison, remembered two women who chose reverence over fear. Pharaoh's monuments would crumble into dust, but the names Shiphrah and Puah would endure in Scripture as eternal memorials of obedience and courage. Their story asks every generation the same question. When fear demands silence, will you still honor life? For in that choice, between fear and faith, death and life, God continues to write his story of redemption. The story of Shiphrah and Puah closes as quietly as it began, but its echo resounds through every generation that must choose between fear and faith. Their defiance did not make headlines in their day. No trumpet announced their act of courage. Yet within the structure of Exodus, their obedience to God becomes the hinge on which liberation turns. Without them, there is no surviving generation for Moses to emerge from. Without them, the covenant's continuity would have been broken in Egypt. Their legacy is one of holy defiance, the kind that does not roar but resists, not in rebellion, but in reverence. The closing verses of Exodus 1 are deceptively simple. God honored them, Israel multiplied, and Pharaoh hardened his oppression. But within that simplicity lies a theological revelation that shapes the rest of Scripture. God's purposes advance not through the thrones of the mighty, but through the faithfulness of those who fear him. The same pattern will appear again in the lives of Rahab, hiding the spies in Jericho, Joshua 2, Esther standing before a Persian king, Esther 4, and Mary saying yes to God in a humble village, Luke 1. Each, like Shiphrah and Puah, chose to obey divine truth rather than human power. Their fear of God, Yirat Adonai, was not dread but devotion. It reoriented their allegiance, redefining authority in an age where Pharaoh claimed to be divine. In fearing God, they refused to deify man. This is the spiritual essence of holy defiance, to live as though God alone holds the right to command conscience. The New Testament later frames this same truth when the apostles, brought before councils of power, declare, "We must obey God rather than men." Acts 5:29. The midwives of Exodus were the first to walk that path. Ordinary women modeling eternal truth long before it was written. Historically, their courage stands in contrast to the world around them. Egypt was the symbol of civilization, power, and permanence. Its rulers were immortalized in stone, their names carved in hieroglyphs meant to outlast time. Yet the midwives' names are the ones preserved in Scripture, while Pharaoh's name, though his empire stretched from Nubia to Canaan, is lost to history. This reversal reveals a consistent biblical irony. God remembers the faithful, not the famous. What humanity builds through fear fades. What is built through faith endures. The moral clarity of their act exposes the deep truth that moral resistance is not rooted in rebellion, but in worship. Their defiance was an act of devotion. By protecting the newborns of Israel, they affirmed the sacredness of life that Pharaoh had sought to destroy. In so doing, they aligned themselves with the Creator's heartbeat, the same Creator who breathed life into Adam and called it very good. They chose the side of creation over destruction, of faith over fear, and God wrote their decision into the moral fabric of history. Scholars across traditions recognize their story as an early declaration of divine justice. Jewish commentators describe their act as Hesed Shel Emet, faithful kindness that flows from truth. Christian theologians, such as Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who himself defied tyranny under Nazi rule, cited them as archetypes of righteous resistance. Their example illustrates that true faith is not passive submission to evil, but active alignment with God's righteousness, even when it costs safety or reputation. The visible fruit of their obedience extended far beyond their lifetime. Because they feared God, the nation multiplied. Because they preserved life, deliverance was born. The same river Pharaoh had filled with death would soon carry a child in a basket of reeds, a living prophecy of God's sovereignty. Through their obedience, God prepared the way for Moses, whose voice would later confront Pharaoh with divine authority. Thus, their defiance became the seedbed of redemption. Yet the most striking aspect of their legacy is its quietness. No miracles accompany their story. No plagues, no parted seas, no divine voice from the burning bush. Their miracle was moral, the power to say no when everyone else was silent. In a world intoxicated by control, they chose conscience. In an empire obsessed with death, they chose life. And in doing so, they revealed that the fear of God is not an escape from courage. It is its foundation. Their story leaves a question for every generation. When fear commands you to be silent, whose voice will you obey? For the God who honored Shiphrah and Puah still honors those who choose truth over tyranny, compassion over compliance, and reverence over fear. Their holy defiance was not an act of rebellion, but a confession of faith, a testimony that even in the darkest systems of power, the light of conscience can still burn, and that the God of life remembers those who protect what he has made.